which you'll hear. And another little housekeeping issue is if you have any questions throughout the presentation, if you'll just hold those, you can sort of use the chat as a parking lot if for your questions or ideas, and we can circle back to those towards the end. So again, welcome. If you have any questions specifically for me also, you can do that in the chat group. Also, I'll have my email in there. And I'm going to turn it over to Sal, the San Francisco Bay Area president.
Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this. This is April, and it's our fourth lecture for this beginning year. We have a few more coming to the rest of the year. I'll announce which ones are those. And I'm looking forward to this presentation because Mr. John French, a retired physician, has written a book about the game was won in the trenches. Now, Americans have a sort of a vague idea of what trenches are like, but he proves a point through his studies and research how that experience in those trenches, where a good many Americans who were involved in World War I had experienced and affected them. Now, the war itself was decided in the French trenches in the French Belgian area of World War I, where the final collapse of the German effort was made. I want to say something on John's behalf. He wrote this book because of his grandfather's letters. Now, this is one of the great ways we learned about World War I, were the letters from individual soldiers back to their families telling them what was it like to be in the World War, whether it be in the trenches, whether it be behind them or whatever. Now, I'd like to say a couple of the things also about it is that if you've ever done a tour of Europe and gone to see what those trenches are like, you can sense that this was not an easy way to be involved in any kind of experience about war. But that's where it made the great difference. And John's historical research, which he found on his own, has written this great book called The Game Was Won in the Trenches. And I urge everyone to consider buying this book because this is going to give you an insight of what it was. His photos that he's going to present to us today made me individually feel like I was right there in the trenches. So let me go over and turn it over to him. John, are you ready?
I am ready.
All right. It's all yours, kid.
Well, thanks for welcoming me. I'm happy to be here. Just a little bit about me is I'm a retired orthopedic surgeon and I had written one book before about my career, but this came about, and I'll tell you a little bit about how this book came about. But a lot of people would talk about the trenches, and so this talk that I have here was I put together for the Orlando Touchdown Club because you know how many times when you're watching a football game does the announcers say that game was won in the trenches, and most people in the United States don't really know what the trenches are like. So I kind of used this as a guide. So Shelley, if you can go to the next slide. So what were the trenches? Next slide, please. So I just have some pictures here, and these are not my pictures. I took some of these from stock photos, but the trenches were not a pleasant place. One of the quotes that I saw was one of the soldiers who said, "People talk about hell being fire and brimstone. Hell is not fire. Hell is wet feet." These were not pleasant places to be. So Shelley, if you can go to the next one. So these are some just stock photos that I was able to find of what kind of gives you a picture of what it's like to be in the trenches. I was just last week at the World War I museum, and they have some very this is in Kansas City, some beautiful reenactments of the trenches and some of the battlefields. If you have never been to the World War I museum, I can strongly recommend it. It's a great place. It's really well done. And so, but these pictures, and they have some reenactments of these what the trenches were like. Next slide, please. So one of the things, and we'll talk a little bit about it, is the poisonous gases that were used. And my grandfather. So I'm going to talk a little bit about it. But my grandfather wrote back one time in one of his letters. He said, "My gas mask is my best friend." And they had very minimal time that they could get their gas masks on before and if they didn't get it on in time, they would die. Maybe not right away, but eventually over the next several days. So um, the trenches were dangerous both in the for both the explosions as well as the gas. Next slide, please. Not a beautiful place. This is how they had to get their food. You can see how muddy and awful it is. Not the, I'm sure the food wasn't terrific either. This was not a pleasant place for those soldiers to be. Next slide, please. This I love this picture. The guy's got he said there's a big hole in his helmet, but that hole is not in his head. So I think he was awful happy to have his helmet. Next slide, please. So the trenches, the key thing that people would kept coming up and through my grandfather's letters, found the trenches were just full of squalid conditions. They were always wet, and and that was the source of trench foot. And trench foot came from having cold, wet feet. And I think the next slide, please, might be a picture of what trench foot is like. This is actually a fairly mild case. Um, as an orthopedic surgeon, I used to take care of people with all sorts of awful things in their legs and wound up having to do amputations on those things. Now, this one right here was probably something that isn't going to need to be amputated. But there are many times those things went on to gangrene, and if they didn't do an amputation, it would turn into sepsis, and they would die from sepsis. But this is an example of trench foot. Next slide, please. So the trenches, they were an awful place. They were breeding grounds for rats, and frequently the rats would feed on dead bodies. I mean, there was dead bodies in the trenches. Rats were an awful thing to have to deal with. And then lice and fleas were a source of both trench fever, and when people would get trench fever, their complaints would be headache, fever, and dizziness. So, which was also one of the things that those same symptoms were pretty nonspecific. Those same symptoms would be what would happen when people would get Spanish flu. And so one of the things that the physicians, they obviously didn't have antibiotics at the time. One of the things the physicians would be faced with is, you know, is it trench fever or is it Spanish flu? And they would say they would figure out if it was trench fever because they got better in 3 or 4 days. If they died, it was Spanish flu. I mean, that's as unspecific as they could treat them at that time. So next slide, please. I love this slide because we went through what did we go through during the pandemic? You have to wear your mask, which a lot of that turned out to be non-productive, but you have to wear your mask. Wear a mask or go to jail. This was 100 years ago. And and we had the same thing. I thought I love this slide. Next one, please. So this is my grandfather, John DeWitt, and I'll tell you a little bit of story about this. Um, I knew him. He was born. He was 21 when he enlisted in 1917. I knew him. He didn't die till I was a sophomore in college. People ask me, he says, did he make it through the did he live through the war? And I says, well, yes, he did, because if he didn't live, I wouldn't be here. So, but this was John DeWitt. This is one of his pictures, and we found a whole box of stuff in my uncle's garage. So this is John DeWitt. His son was John DeWitt Jr. We found a box in his garage in Oklahoma City that my sister found. And can we go to the next slide, Shelley? So this is an example. So on the left is one of the letters, one of the 80 letters that we found. We found these 80 letters that, and when my sister said, and I thought they were kind of interesting, so we started going through them, and you can see there on the right, we took all these 80 letters in remarkably good shape. I mean, I could read his handwriting, both his quality of his penmanship, the quality of the ink, the quality of the paper. You can see up there it says 1917, and it was in great condition. In fact, his writing that done 100 years ago is more legible than mine that I'd written the day before. Being being a physician, we're not known for our good penmanship. His penmanship was much better. So what we did is we took those letters you can see on the left and put them on in chronologic order, and you can see what they on the right is in my sister's living room. We commandeered her tables, and then put them into chronologic order. Then I went through and took all those letters and sat down and did a spreadsheet on it. I numbered them in chronologic order. I put the number, the date, where he was, what he was doing at the time, and then my impressions of what was going on. And those letters are what we used. And so I also took those letters and had them typed. I had my former secretary, typed them up for me. And then we put them into type form and made a little booklet out of that. So I have they got the letters and I started going through them, and I was just riveted. Was couldn't be more excited to go through the letters. As I read them, I go, "There's hardly anything here." There would be a few times that there would be letters, interesting things, but it says there's hardly anything interesting here. And as we started going through it, we realized that they were told they couldn't put anything interesting in the letters because they were censored. Some of them you can see some ink down there on the bottom letter. Some of the censors actually cut out chunks of the letter, and some of the letters um, as we were going through, we couldn't read it because it was censored. And so then we realized that the letters themselves were not that fascinating. Um, but I did find one little area. I found this other letter that it was written in. My grandfather became an attorney in small town Iowa, and he had his secretary type up a little thing of what it was like to be a trench runner, because that's what my grandfather was in the war. And so in 1972, he wrote a note to me and to my uncle saying, "You asked about what it was like to be in the war, or to be a trench runner, and this is the best description I can have." I actually never saw that. I didn't see that until we opened this a box of letters, and I felt like, there it said to Jack DeWitt and to John Chase. My name's John Chase, and he said, and then I felt like the letters were somebody's. It feels like he's talking to me out of his grave, telling me do something with these letters. So as I had a vast experience of writing a book, I decided that I would try to make a book out of this. And I turned it into a book of narrative nonfiction. Shelley was kind enough to post the link to the Amazon up there in the notes. Um, and so when we get all done, I'll be happy to answer any other questions that you have about it. But this started off just as something being interesting for me, but then once we actually got the letters and I started going into it, it became a project, became a labor of love, and took me about a year and a half to 2 years to do all the research and get everything put together. So, Shelley, if you can go on to another slide, please. This is just another picture of the letters in chronologic order. Next slide, please. So this is the book that I came up with called "Searching for John DeWitt." How 80 forgotten letters from the trenches of World War I revealed timeless lessons of honor and courage. And so And I'll show you a picture. This cover was designed by my son-in-law, who does a lot of, I really liked what he did with it. We started with a picture, and I just told him what I wanted, and he changed it. So the cover was done was a family project to get some of this book published. So next slide, please. This was my grandfather's Purple Heart. He was both injured and gassed in July of 1918 in sweeps, is I believe how they pronounce it. He was in a big offensive in the war. He was going over the top and was both injured and gassed, and so he received his Purple Heart from for doing this. So next slide, please. So this was an interesting photo. I don't know how many of you know Mike Hanlon. Mike does a blog related to World War One, and so I was in contact with Mike, and I sent him some of the pictures. And he looked at this picture. He said he's looked at thousands of pictures from World War One, but he's never seen one quite like this. So this is my grandfather speaking over the grave of one of his compatriots. And Mike said he'd never seen a picture quite like that, and he was quite taken with it. And this is just in the stuff that we found, in my grandfather's stuff. Next slide, please. So this was a picture I put in there just to kind of give you an idea of what the medical condition was like. So maybe an orthopedic surgeon, I was very interested in this. Um, and it's been quite, one of the things that they tell us in surgery and in orthopedic surgery is that we learn the most from wars. And the wars teach us what works, what doesn't. And so I became quite interested in the initial triage, getting the soldiers to the localized. They progressed a lot during World War One on learning how to take care of the soldiers, getting them evacuated, treated early, getting them evacuated to major hospitals, and then rehabilitating in the base hospital. So this is probably one of the earlier hospitals. And my grandfather spent the last 3 months after February of 1918 until the armistice in November. He was in the hospital for 3 months. Um, but I was quite interested in the development of the medical side of this. One of the things as I was reading through all of you see the numbers of casualties, numbers of deaths, numbers of deaths. And so as I started looking at it, I can see that yes, there's people who get blown up and they die right away, but there's a whole bunch of people that were injured and got sent to the hospitals. They didn't have antibiotics at that time. And I know there was a whole bunch of soldiers that died because of infection. And in the inability to treat the infection, to be able to treat it surgically, treat it with antibiotics. So today, those injuries are treated much more quickly. One of the things you'll see in soldiers that are injured today, there's a lot of them that have a lot of amputations. You see a lot more amputations and people living with amputations. That's because they're treated quickly and they don't die. Those same soldiers, if they were in World War One, would have died very, very quickly, or over the next week or 2 weeks after getting infected. So, but it was very interesting to see that just because of the quality of the medical care and the things that they had to be able to treat soldiers with, why there were so many deaths during that First World War, which was the first basically mechanized war that occurred. So, next slide, please. So this is another picture I just put in there. I asked my son-in-law when we were trying to figure out this wasn't a picture that we used for the cover, but I asked him to come up with a something, and he used AI. I mean, I don't understand a artificial intelligence, but he does. He works in that area, and he came up and he came up with this picture, which I thought was just really moving about, writing letters in the World War. I really like this picture. Next slide, please. We'd used another one. There was one of my one of the in the letters. Again, they didn't say much, but the most meaningful, gut-wrenching letter I saw was the one that was written right as the war was finishing when he wrote home to his father. And most of the letters didn't have a lot of gut-wrenching stuff in it. This one did because it wasn't censored. So one of the things he put in there, he said it's really difficult. Says I didn't know I didn't know before I came over here whether I was, what I was made of. And he said at the time, he says, I know I'm not yellow now. Now you and I know that what he meant is I know I'm not a coward. Now, you could never say that today, 'cause somebody would accuse you of being racist. But he says, I know I'm not a coward. So we used this as a possible cover, but decided not to use it. But I really like this picture too. Next. So this was his commendation from the American Expeditionary Force in July of 1918 after he was injured. And this was all together, and I'll show you coming up a little bit. All his stuff was together. Next slide, please. This was everything together. So it shows down at the bottom left his Purple Heart. He has another medal, and I'm not sure exactly what that was for. There's the commendation, and there is that picture of him reading. Apparently my uncle and his wife had put this together in this little shadow box, which I never remember seeing until we got this stuff out of the garage. So, next slide, please. Oops, another one of the I know I'm not a coward. Next, please. These were just a number of pictures of this was actually a real photo that my grandfather had sent home. This is when they were, getting ready to go over, and they had these big parades and send-off parades. And I'm not exactly sure that where that was, but you can see how everybody was encouraging the soldiers. Next slide, please. Oops, that one somehow got in there. Next, please. And that's the same thing. Next. So this was interesting, something we found. Instructions for the troops. One of the things I tried to do with this book was to we didn't really talk about I didn't really talk about, troop movements and battles and who went where. I tried to make it so that people could see what it was like for the soldiers. And so this was something in his information, his instructions for the troops. And you can look down, so you can see where he was. And down at the bottom, if you can go down there to the next slide, Shelley. Yeah, I love this one in here. So down there at the bottom, and I can't really point to it, but where it says, in case of abandoned ship, remember there's lots of times, just wait for the call. Any man starting a stampede will be shot in his tracks. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Um, they were not fooling around. So one of the chapters I have in the book talks about what it was like to go across in the troop ship. And my grandfather's ship went across, got third of the way across, third of the way there, didn't somehow something failed. They had to go back. So then they had to make another trip. And one of the riskiest things for them was getting shot down by U-boats. So the mere fact he made it over there means he had some pretty good fortune. Next slide, please. So this was a picture he had in one of his letters, he wrote this little diagram. So you can look down there at the kind of the bottom right where it says side view, you can see that where he had written in what it was like for the soldiers, how they were banked. I don't know, Shelley, if you can show down there on this where it says the side view, over to the right a little bit, for even more. Yeah, right over along in through there, where it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that showed the side view, how the soldiers were stacked on top of each other. And then the picture on the far left is what the end view. So that was basically the way they slept when they were traveling across to across the Atlantic. Um, they trained initially in Long Island at Camp Mills, got on the ships, transferred over to Southampton, England, trained there for a while, and then eventually were shipped back across into France for the further training. They really didn't get a lot of training, what would have been preferable. So. My grandfather, the war was going on since, early in 1915 and 16. My grandfather didn't enlist until April of 1917 when the, United States declared the war. So there was a lot of war that occurred before the United States ever got in. Next slide, please. That's just another picture of him. And one of the things that I thought it was hard for me to look is my grandfather smoked. Again, I'm a doctor. I know smoking is terrible, but that's what everybody did at the time. So, I mean, he talked in his letters about how much he enjoyed his tobacco and the cigarettes and how important that was. Another thing that came out in his letters was how important it was for them to get letters from home, care packages from home. They lived for that. It was the biggest thing that they had going for them. So, next slide, please. This is that's another picture of the trench. So, next slide. So this is the picture that we started with when and I don't know, Shelley, if you can go back and forth to the cover of the book. This is the picture I started with. I like this picture to try to put on the cover because I like the starkness of it. I like the you could have the barbed wire, this the solo soldier, the fog, the how gray it was. I like the starkness of that picture to kind of portray for, what it was like to be in the war. So we took that picture and converted it in. I told my son-in-law, I said, "Can you make a trench out of that?" Boom. He types in and AI gives him a trench. And can he put some barbed wire in there? And can we have some, so that's how we came up with the cover. I didn't use any AI when I wrote this book. So this was all written by humans, but the cover we did use some AI for that. So next slide, please. And then this is the actual cover that we came up with. So Shelley, if you can go back and forth between those two, go back one. That's what we started with, and that's what we finished. So the other thing you can see right there, right up above where, and my son-in-law did this on his own, that letter that said, I know that it takes real courage. And so he took the picture he put on AI and then superimposed it on one of the letters. So you can see right there where it says real courage is outlined. And I really liked how that came out. I was told that, yeah, right there. Um, that was a letter he wrote home to his father where he says, "I know I'm not yellow." And that was that was the most,
Holy.
it was the last letter he wrote until he got home. And then we never saw anything. The real hero in all this is obviously him writing the letters, but it was his mother keeping the letters and then giving them to him and then him keeping them. And so, it was total serendipity that I actually got the letters to look at. So, next slide, please. And is that it? I think, yeah, I think that's it. So, um, so that's all I have for a formal presentation. I'll be happy to answer questions. There's lots of little things that I learned along the way in doing this. My whole goal in writing this book was to give people an idea of what it was like for the soldiers. And then one of the things I put in the dedication is what you hear all the time is when people talk to soldiers, they say, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. And yes, that's good. But what I have put in the dedication is that I would like people to start um, asking soldiers and veterans about their service because they normally won't talk to you about it. They don't like to talk about it because how awful it was. But they will. Some of them will. Some of them won't. But if I when I was 18 is when my grandfather wrote that note to me about in 1972. I wasn't paying attention. I was was playing football and getting ready to go to college. Um, so I really didn't listen. And if I would have never known about any of this if we hadn't have just by chance found these letters in an attic in Oklahoma City. And the fact that they weren't destroyed, they didn't rot out. Um, so and if I would have never known about this facet of my grandfather, to me, I mean, I remember him. He was just kind of this fat old guy that smoked cigars, and he and I watched football games together, and he was pretty quiet. He never talked about this at all. And we'd have never known if we hadn't had the letters. So what I try to put in my dedication is dedicate this to the soldiers and the veterans. Ask them about their service because they're probably not going to bring it up unless you actually ask. So, um, any questions anybody wants to bring up?
And we
Uh,
have one question here from
yeah.
my guest here. Now,
Okay.
So I wanted to know, where was your grandfather stationed during the war? What was he fighting or what was he doing?
Yeah, he was fighting in north and east of Paris, and I have here the names of the places where he went. Oh, some here on this less than organized desk. Um,
And
hang
what
on.
was his job in
He
the
was a
service?
trench runner. So
Okay.
he ran in the trenches. And so that's one of the things. Yeah. He was initially in Rimacourt and then Luneville, then later to Baccarat, Badonville, Grand Bois, Chateau Thierry, and then he finally was injured in Sweeps, which is where he was injured. Um, he was a runner in the trenches, which was probably the most dangerous job because it took you had to be fast, you had to be smart, and you were selected for that. Now, whether you're selected to be a trench runner may not have been the greatest honor because that was probably the most dangerous thing you could be. But he ran the trenches for 6 months, finally got injured and gassed. So then he was spent 3 months in the hospital. But that's where he was, and that's what he did. I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure.
yeah,
I have
John, yeah, John, those letters that he wrote from there,
Uh-huh.
there are a lot of letters he received from home. Do you have any of those letters?
No, no, not at all. I mean, I don't know if he had the capacity to be able to, to keep them. I am amazed that he wrote those letters. I mean, there was 80, and they were like 2 and 3 and 4 page letters. He became an attorney, so apparently he was pretty good with words. And um, but we do not have any of the letters. And then they just disappeared when the war ended. And he came home, and only because his mother saved the letters and then gave them to him when she died, before she died, he gave them to his son, and he kept them. And what's amazing to me is they didn't just get tossed in a landfill somewhere.
They were already out in the garage. That's not a good sign either. I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Um, I bought the book, but I thought I would read it this week and that didn't happen. Does it go into detail about how he actually ran the trenches? I mean, um, and you should say that in your next presentation because um he's a messenger is basically what he is.
Yep.
And It's a good thing you didn't use the picture where he was going up over the top and getting tangled in the barbed wire because my reading suggests that nobody ever did that, that they ran them at night and they went behind they started off back further in the lines and then did it as I don't know, sneaked as much as they could. They didn't go right up over the top, certainly not in daylight. Um, and that I believe the World War One movie that was called 1917 that
Uh-huh.
portrayed it wasn't about trench running, but you had a better sense of how they actually did it and how scary it was. Um, and then secondly, as a historian, I'm just aghast about changing picture using AI to generate pictures. You can't do that. At least in my book, if you did that, my copy of your book, at least you didn't say you did that. And the reason is that if people 10 years from now, when there's tons of AI all over, people won't believe history. They don't believe history now, or that we wouldn't have a lot of stuff that's going on right now happen. But because, only you and me and 10 other people read history and the rest of the population doesn't. And so if they get right now, people don't know a lot about the general populace don't know anything about World War One, and it'll be only worse in 20 or 30 years. And if they see pictures that were AI generated, they think, well, they just made this up. This didn't happen. There was not a lot of blood and guts in the trenches, and it's horrible for history. Um,
Interesting point. And I can say there was nothing AI was used except for the cover. Now, we did use that to cover because everything I was told, if you want to sell a book, you have got to have an enticing cover.
Oh,
So,
and that's true. And this, at least on this one, it looks authentic. It looks that those look like trenches, and the um somebody will tell you that the jacket wasn't right. I don't know enough about World War One uniforms but people who really do will say, oh, that jacket's too long. At least the helmet looks right. But it it's a bit, and I know you have to, but you better not, don't ever tell anybody that's AI generated. It
okay,
looks, you know, because they
that,
won't believe it.
that's a good point. So I will. Point well taken. Thank you.
Yeah, John, I have another point. I've been
Yeah.
wanting to know about this deal on there. How long did your dad stay in Europe before he was transferred back to home? Do you
Well,
know?
my grandfather,
Yeah.
um, he went over there in let's see, in November of 1917.
All right.
Then wound up getting into France. January, February. They trained there, and then he was there until the end of the war. Now he was in the hospital from July to November of 1918, um, when the armistice was signed. So, but
Well,
he
what was it? What was he, gassed or
he was
wounded?
he was gassed. He was also injured. He got shrapnel. He didn't wasn't injured badly, but apparently badly enough to be in the hospital for 3 months. So it was an interesting. One of the things I found when I was researching this stuff is, you know, is how awful the gas was. He was terrified of the gas. He says that's what scares me the most. And so one of the things that we found in doing the research is they used to be able to um, tell when a gas capsule was broken through some of the bombs that had the poisonous gas in it, what gas it was by how it smelled. So I wrote that down. Chlorine was kind of a green cloud. Phosgene was colorless, but it kind of smelled like hay. So if they smelled hay, they knew phosgene was coming. The worst one was mustard gas, which kind of absorbed through, and that kind of smelled like garlic. But that, even if you had your mask on, that could absorb through your clothes, and you could die just from the mustard gas. That's what they were afraid of the most. One of the other things I learned that I didn't know is that the Germans weren't the only ones who used poisonous gas. Our side used it as well.
Oh yeah,
So
they did. Yeah.
um, that was
Yes.
and
Yeah.
fortunately, it's not used too much anymore. But that was so I learned lots when I started doing all the research about this stuff.
Yeah. One of the things I liked about the gas, it killed rats.
Hmm.
And and
That's true.
that's the other thing they liked about the gas
That's
is that
true.
it do that. But there was that, that feeling of this. My concern about this use of gas and the fact that your grandfather was a victim of it is it was it used to the very last day of the war? I wonder, did they ever have periods where it just wasn't practical to use it?
I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Mhm.
Um, but I know he got his Purple Heart from a combination of both gas and getting injured by the shrapnel.
Mm.
I
I have
have
a, I have a couple research questions for you.
Okay.
I have something somewhat similar. My grandfather served in the 101st Field Artillery, Battery A in France, and I received a bunch of his old photos from when he was at Camp Cody and various places while training before he got overseas. The problem I ran into trying to track him down is in 72, the fire destroyed in St. Louis, destroyed all the records. Were
Yep.
you able to get hold of your grandfather's military records? And if not, how did you piece together where he served to get a timeline of that information? That's the first question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we weren't able to really. And if you look through the letters, I mean, his letters are he says somewhere in France.
Yeah,
So what we had to do is that I had his dates. Then we went back, and there was two books that we used. One was the history of the Rainbow Division. There was and then articles written by George Patullo in the New Saturday Evening Post. So we were able, and I had help. I'm not a researcher on this. I had help with
mm,
this, but we found where his division was at that particular date, so then we could go back and then piece together where he was. But it wasn't, you couldn't tell from the letters. Okay,
yeah.
you're very right. We couldn't tell. So it was trying to put things together retrospectively.
And you never got his personnel file.
Never got his person. Same thing. I got the same thing you did. Is that there was a big fire somewhere and everything all got all burned up.
Yep.
We never had it.
So that was the track that I was going to go down. He was in the 26th Division, and I know the exact regiment, so I was going down into unit histories to try to figure out. And then the other one is that an Iowa State shirt you're wearing there?
You bet it is.
Well,
Absolutely.
as a somewhat fellow Iowan, born in California but family from Iowa, I got to say, go Hawks! But I do appreciate Cy.
Yep. Well, I went to college at Iowa State. I went to medical school at the University of Iowa.
Oh,
So
you're a two. There you
So my
go.
allegiances always go with Iowa State unless well I'm for Iowa. I'll root for Iowa unless they're playing Iowa State.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Well, I had a cousin play football for the Hawks back in the mid '70s. Mark Fetter, he was a fullback. So
Uh-huh.
their teams were horrible, but at the age of 9, I got to go watch them play in the Coliseum against USC, and got to meet the players afterwards in the locker room. Been a diehard Hawkeye fan since.
Yeah.
It's kind of way Iowa works in your blood, never leaves you.
Yep. Yep.
John, I
I
have another series of issues that I always wonder about. That is that did you ever compare any of these letters to others that people wrote home?
I haven't. I do have one fellow. It was been interesting. I've made some interesting connections through all of this. One fellow sent me a copy of his grandfather's diary that he had. And so I was able to compare some of that was in the diary. And then because he didn't send it anywhere, the troop so it was a little bit had a little bit better information. And then there was another interesting, and I don't know if, and you may have all heard of it, but it was somebody led me to a movie or a documentary called A Golden Cross to Bear.
That's right.
And
Yes.
it was a documentary done by a fellow from Illinois, and then a guy did the documentary, and so he traveled over to France and Belgium, and went to where his grandfather was, which is what I'm going to do in a couple of weeks. So I thought that was really interesting. He had the same problems as he wasn't had been able, couldn't get much information on exactly what his grandfather was doing. But and so Alice, what you had talked about is that I'm hoping that I have this delusional idea that somebody's going to read this and go, oh, this can we can make a movie out of this. So so far it hasn't happened. I discovered that writing a book is a contact sport, because if you go through and look at the reviews, most people have liked it. There's some people don't, and they're not afraid to trash you at all. I've learned a lot. I've got a much thicker skin now than I used to. And I don't immediately write off 3-page retorts when somebody criticizes my book. I've had to learn to try to roll with the punches.
Well, when I bought the book, it seemed to me that Amazon uh, uh, showed that it was selling pretty good for a World War One book. I didn't make a thorough study of it, but I remember looking at it. Well, that's interesting.
It's
So
it's it's
you're
it's
doing
very
well.
interesting. That's I had a terrible. I couldn't get. What I kept getting when I tried to get a publisher was that people are interested in World War II. They're
Yeah.
interested in the Civil
If it's
War,
got if it's a
but
if it's red cover with a swastika on it, it almost always will sell, and that's been true for 50 years. The comment I was going to make, and I've got this book here. You should definitely read the Sellers of Marcel Cobb, and that's
Yes.
Cellars.
okay.
And I would give you the name. I've got it right here, but I can't reach it. I've got too much stuff in front of it. It was written by uh, I believe a son or a grandson like you of a doctor who was a in treating soldiers in France in World War One, and in Marcel Caven. I can't remember what part of France that is, but it's Marcelcave, like cave, I believe. And it's a really interesting book, and it was published in the 90s. And we had him speak for the Great War Society, which was what this organization used to be called. Um, and and I would think, Sal, I think it was at that seminar we had, and I can't remember where that was. But it was an interesting book, and he would describe it very well. So it right up your alley.
Yeah. No, I find that we were at the World War One museum, and I was fascinated by the instruments they had to use and what they
Oh yeah,
could use and what
really
they couldn't
primitive.
use. Yeah.
None of that is the Civil War, but working on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, knowing what they had to work with, I'm astonished what they were able to do.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, John. You're doing a great job. Those photographs really make this one of the best ways of grasping how difficult it was. And yeah, I hate to say that express you this way, but I think I could smell some of those trenches right from those pictures,
Yeah.
what they went through. The one thing about when you showed about the problem of being damp and the infections they got on their bodies and their feet and everything else, to what extent was that a crippling thing for people who were actually involved in the war? In other words, how long did they stay in the trenches before they were relieved?
Well, I wasn't able to figure out exactly, what their times of deployment and when. I know my grandfather said from his letters that they sent him back to Roland Pont, or I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it right, to get a little break and then they'd go back in. But when your feet are wet like that, they start to rot. I mean, that's what trench foot was. And if they
Yeah.
got far enough and the skin broke through, and there was openings, then that's when they got a deep infection. And that is the worst environment for an infection. And they lost certainly toes, feet. Um, I'm sure it was awful. I mean, I've taken care of people that have had, something like that, but not to the extent of what they were doing.
Well, the British rotated their men in the trenches every 2 weeks.
Two
I don't know
weeks.
whether it was, so I don't know whether that's enough time, but even that short a time, you can still get infected with everything that's out
Sure.
there.
And if
Uh,
it dried out, it would be fine. But
yeah,
that's, having dry feet was hell for them was, a wet standing in wet, muddy feet.
yeah. Well,
Well,
were the shoes better built then, or weren't they better built, or
You
what
know,
can
I,
you say?
I don't know. If it got wet, it doesn't really matter much.
No, it's true.
but from what I've read on the trench runners actually had less like were le not a, less likely to get trench feet because they weren't in the trenches that much. They were at least on the move, and uh, not just standing there in the puddles. But another book you should read. Hitler was a trench runner for the German army.
You
Um,
Yep.
and there's a lot of documentation, several books on Hitler's service in World War One, which you'll find interesting. Uh, and as I recall from those, the problem was not so much the physical stuff because you were on the move. You also had downtime. What I was going to say, you had, and I don't know because this was the Germans. They worked differently than than the French and the English and the Americans did. But you had downtime, and that's how he got his start. He would be back in the back areas, sitting around talking to men, and started, you know, expounding on his ideas, and that's how he got started. Of course, if the men he was doing it with was a captive audience, they had no place else to go than sit and listen to him, rant on. But it's a different perspective,
Yeah.
and there at least is information about him out there.
Yeah.
I have one more quick question.
Yep.
That photo of him at the funeral, it appears that it happened after the war because there's civilians standing around. Was it a friend, a colleague?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, there was nobody there to talk to. I mean, there's probably only three people alive that, me and my sisters, and then there was one set of friends that we have who are 90 and 92 that they knew him. They were friends of my parents, but there's nobody there to ask. So,
Uh, and
yeah, you
nobody
really,
nobody put a
Right.
notation on the back of the photo.
Mm.
So and
no.
so's funeral service, X date 1923.
No, you're
None of
right.
that.
There's civilians, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's civilians from home or for civilians over there in France. Certainly looks like it's over there in France.
It could be, or it could have been something stateside. And it must have been a close friend to have a private
No,
talking about
Yeah.
the
the
guy.
stateside, they're all wearing uniforms. The men are all wearing uniforms. I'm trying to find the picture now. I'm not doing very well. That woman in the hat looked to me like she might have been yeah, here we go. I think the woman in the hat may have been like the the boss of the nurses, so to speak, the head nurse.
Yeah.
And they would come to those things. This is battlefield. Um, because the men are not only wearing uniforms, they're wearing those respirator things that they over their necks and bags, those things.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yeah, the other civilians are they're wearing suits. I don't know. They could be anybody.
Yeah.
Um,
You've got a good eye because you picked right up on that.
did a lot of surveillance. Um, for the phone company. Um, I'm trying to see. I don't, but I hear what you mean. but in the background, there look like there are those wooden crosses. And so this is, battlefield right then, not 6 months later.
Interesting.
John, what rank did your grandfather reach?
I think he was just I don't think he even made lieutenant. I think he was like
No.
well, one of the things he said is he actually liked not being advanced because then he was a runner for the brigade, and he liked not advancing because then he could remain in that job.
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
All right. Well, listen, John, thank you very much for this.
You are welcome.
Everybody there, I want
to.
to announce that the next meeting we have is on the 10th of May, Saturday. And Timothy Westcott is going to give a talk about camoufleur. Now, there's a role of camouflage in World War
Oh,
One.
wow.
So I think that should be a very exciting and interesting place. But John, let me thank you again. You
You
did
are
a
welcome.
splendid job. And
Glad to do it.
I want everybody to buy that book.
Mhm.
Come on.
Well, thank
Yeah.
you. And
when
then,
you're back from your trip, give me a call and tell me how it went. All
yeah,
right.
okay,
All
great.
right.
Well, thank you all
Thanks
very
everyone.
much. Mhm.
Thanks, everyone.
Are we good?